This is the Horse Radio Network.
You're listening to The Stall and Stable Show. Ideas for happy horsekeeping.
Well, we finally did it. After years and years of looking and longing, Buck and Helena have found a winter retreat. Not just for us, but for Brody, Susie, and Clarabelle. This is a long one, but we think you're going to like it. So listen in.
This is episode 114 of The Stall and Stable Show, brought to you by American Stalls. American Stalls is expanding their offerings, and if you have not checked in with them lately, today would be a great time to do that. In addition to beautiful stall components, American Stalls now offers stall mat options, rubber pavers, fencing, and mud control grids, and the super cool bedding blocker. Visit them online at americanstalls.com. Welcome back, listeners. Today is Wednesday, April 12th, 2023. I have hijacked the show today. This is Buck Harris, Helena's husband, and I'm here to interview Helena today. Please support our show by letting our sponsors know they're in good company. In addition to American Stalls, we are grateful for the support of Barn Pros, shipping their equestrian home and barn kits nationwide. You can find them online at barnpros.com. Welcome, listeners. As I mentioned, this is Buck Harris. I have taken over the show today. Helena is unable to host, so she has to be a guest today. She just has too many exciting things going on in her life to actually host the show. So I said, let me take over and I will interview you today. So let me please introduce my special guest, Helena Harris. Helena, welcome to the Stall and Stable Show.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And you have a lot of exciting things going on. It is spring at Who Hollow. And when you look outside, what are you seeing this time of year? What's happening in Rhode Island?
It's still cold in Rhode Island. That's what's happening.
She's not giving that up yet.
No. The grass is starting to get a little bit green,
okay,
and the horses are getting sassy.
All right. Is the ground drying out a little bit?
Yeah, it is actually. We're getting longer stretches of days in between rain and sleet.
Why does it seem like we go from total wet, drenched mud to drought? There's nothing in between sometimes, it seems like. Is that just a barn thing, or is that... I never noticed it till I was so involved with horses.
That's because you notice everything when you're with horses, because everything the weather does interferes with your horse life.
Well, the daffodils are in full bloom here in Rhode Island. So even though the trees are brown and gray, the daffodils are coming up. The crocuses, some of them have already finished in our front yard. So I think spring is well on its way. Well, I thought since we were doing a special version of the Stall and Stable Show today, we would take our listeners on a little Helena journey back through time. And I want everybody to stay tuned because we have some exciting news to talk about when we get down the timeline to the present day of April 14th, 2024. So, Helena, take us back to the very beginning of your horse life.
Oh, my God.
Who was the first horse you ever rode? Where were you? And what was it like?
The first horse I ever rode was a little pinto pony named Apache at Camp Scuffy in Suffern, New York. And I think it was 1975.
Okay. And what was your experience like? What did you do?
Oh, my God. I fell in love.
You did?
Camp Scuffy was a day camp, and it was in the town where I grew up.
Okay.
They had a little lake. And you could do canoeing and fishing, and they had arts and crafts, and they had archery, and they had all these things.
So a real life, typical day camp. It wasn't sleepover camp?
Nope, wasn't sleepover camp. It was day camp. The two places that I wanted to spend the most time were the pool and the corral.
The corral.
Air quotes. They called it the corral.
How many horses did they have?
They probably had 5, which is a lot for a little day camp.
Yeah.
And the corral was set up, it was basically, a sand arena, but it was a track. So they had interior fencing. So you could really only go in a circle. Like you could only follow the rail of the oval ring.
Okay.
And it really was a corral. So,
And they put you in a Western saddle, or did they have an English saddle, or do you even remember?
I do
You probably
not
don't even
remember. I think the one picture I have of me on Apache, I'm pretty sure it was a Western saddle. I had no helmet on. I was wearing a T-shirt, shorts, and my red suede Pumas with tube socks pulled up over my knees. What a dork.
So you're like 7 years old.
Yep.
And when you got up in the morning, do you remember being excited to like go to camp? And did you get to ride like a lot, or was it just like a couple times, or was it like a regular thing at the camp?
Well, it was supposed to be like, okay, once a week. This is, you would rotate around all the different things that you had at the camp.
Okay.
So although we did swim just about every day. And I think my mom had signed me up for that. Like, this kid needs to be in the water, so make sure she swims every day. So it was supposed to be once a week, and somehow I finagled getting to ride every day.
Oh, of course you did.
And I was so mad because, you could only ride for half an hour, like, or whatever it was. Your time in the tack was probably 15, 20 minutes, and it was never enough. And my God, I hated to get off. And I pretty much only rode Apache. I might have ridden one or two other ponies. I remember a dark bay. Actually, I think he was a brown horse, whose name I can't remember. Is probably Brownie or something like that. But I never had a bad experience. I saw kids fall off. I didn't care. I'm like, that might happen to me someday. Okay.
Right.
Like it didn't frighten me. The last week of the last summer I was there, I was just starting to canter. Okay. And I had cantered twice, and then that was it. Camp ended for the season, and then I aged out of the program.
What was your next horse experience beyond that?
My next experience from that was vacationing at Lake George with my best friend, who is now this amazing backcountry skier, emergency physician in Colorado somewhere. She was so cool. And her parents put her in riding lessons up in Lake George for the summer. And I would go up there with them for several weeks at a time. And whenever their mom brought the kids to their riding lessons, they're like, "Do you want a lesson?" I was like, "Okay." So I had a couple of formal riding lessons, and that was in English tack. And I remember the whole concept of posting being so magical to me. It was the first time I experienced the rhythm of riding with horses, because when you're in a Western saddle, like at camp, you're jogging. Okay. And so we didn't really learn how to post. And then up at Lake George, I can't remember the name of the barn. I didn't remember nothing except being so excited about this thing called posting. So I think I did that one or two summers. And then I did some trail riding with my dad in Pennsylvania. So he would go and play golf down in Shawnee. My cousins had a condo there. And every once in a while, my dad and I would go out for a trail ride. And when my dad was in the Army, when he was stationed in Arizona, one of his responsibilities was to work in the barns out there and take what was left of the American cavalry horses. The military didn't need them anymore. They retired them to this ranch in Arizona. And that's where my dad's base was. And he would tell me stories of galloping through the Arizona desert and just how magical it was. So he would take me on these trail rides in Pennsylvania. They were short loops, and Western tack. And I remember one day, I probably told this story before. I remember one day we came to a little stream, and I was on this Palomino quarter horse who just refused to cross the stream. Okay. And I couldn't get him to go. I couldn't get it. Obviously, right? With those of us who know horses now, crossing waters.
And you're with your dad.
And he's in front of me.
And he's on the other side of the stream going, "Come on, you can do it."
Yeah.
I can just picture it.
And I'm like, "I can't do it, Daddy. I gotta get off. I want to go home."
Did you finally get across, or no? This horse was not crossing the stream.
I finally got across.
Oh, all right.
I got so mad because my dad wouldn't let me get off, or he wouldn't let me go home. And he's like, "You can't get off. You got to encourage this horse to go forward." So he went back across the stream and then was like, "Okay, I'm going to go. As soon as I go, let's do it."
So you got the horse across.
I got the horse across, and I was like, "That's it. I want to ride. For the rest of my life, I want to ride."
Really? Why did that? And it's so funny because that moment of getting, like, I'm sure you did these trail rides. That moment really stands out. I think there's something really important about memories like that, where you have kind of a blur of, I rode and I did all these different things, but there's one or two pieces of that experience that really speak to you still. And when you talk about your riding, so the two things that really stand out, the posting and getting that horse across the stream. And to this day, you still love the challenges that come with horseback riding, even though to me, there's so much sadomasochism involved with being a horse owner. It's like, why? Why do you put yourself through this? And yet there's something about it that is very endearing to you and something that you love. So congratulations, you got the horse across the stream, and that was the moment. You really feel like that was the moment that turned the corner for you.
Yeah, I'm going to correct you on one thing. I don't love the challenges. I love overcoming the challenges.
Okay.
And that is a recurring theme in my life. And it's the I did it feeling. Look what I can do. That's always been a motivator for me.
Especially when your dad, it doesn't matter who it is. If your dad is there and they're encouraging you to do something and then you finally do it. And the more painful it is, the better when you finally get over it. That's so significant. And I think that, your dad has passed many years ago now. The bond that you had with him and the horses, it may not be something that's in the front of your mind, but it's certainly something that's deep in your heart. And I can feel the love and the pride you have of your dad riding across the plains on these animals back in the day, and the joy that comes from you when you speak about it.
And to give you a picture of my dad riding, he always wore a felt hat and Ray-Ban aviator sunglasses and a cigarette. So he was riding his horse, smoking a Parliament with his glasses on, being like, come on, Hooli. He used to call me hooligan. He'd say, come on, Hooli, you could do it. My dad taught me how to get a horse across the stream. He taught me how to ski. He taught me how to drive. He taught me how to jump off of tall things into water. I became a diver. He taught me how to throw a ball. If he had a son, I was an only child. If he had a son, he taught me all the things he would have taught his son, but he never stripped me of the feminine spirit of it. Like he understood what would motivate me in all these physical activities and all these things was a little bit different than what may motivate a boy. He taught me how to play golf. The only thing he didn't teach me how to do was play lacrosse.
I think he taught you how to challenge yourself, too.
Yes,
And, my dad challenged me when I was a kid, and I hated it. I would cry and throw my mitt, my baseball
I
mitt
did that too.
And stomp my feet. And I guess I would rise to the occasion. But I'm not a naturally competitive person. Like, I compete against myself a little bit on certain things. You don't have a killer instinct, but you have a sense of, from an athletic point of view, personal growth and challenging yourself athletically that I really don't have. And I really admire that about you. I wish I had gotten to meet Sal. Yeah. It's one of my great disappointments in life that I never got to meet him, because he was the pictures. If anybody could see pictures of him, he was a cool doo-wop cat from New York City in the 50s and 60s. And
he really could sing and dance. He was such a multi-talented person. He could sing. He had an amazing voice. He could dance. He was just really kind of cool.
All right. So we're getting a little flavor of what motivates Helena, what excites her. What happened next in your horse journey?
Well, I had to make a decision at some point between in sports. And so in high school, so just quickly to go back, my dad wanted me to play professional golf. He thought that I was good enough that I could tour with the LPGA. Mm-hmm. Golf was so boring to me, though. And it drove him crazy because he was like, you are so good at this. But I didn't want to do it. I wasn't drawn to golf the way I was to other things. I was always that type. Skiing, yes. Moving forward in space and time, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. So I had to make a decision at some point, like what I wanted to spend my time doing. So I ended up playing lacrosse, which got me into college. And
you were quite a lacrosse player, Miss D1. I get to sing your praises a little bit.
I loved lacrosse because it was a team sport that was really, really dependent on your teammates. There's so much passing involved that you couldn't function, you couldn't play, you couldn't develop your skill set without your teammates.
Well, horseback riding is very much of a team sport at the end of the day, and your teammate is your horse. One of the things that I love about riding, I mean, I got on Brody yesterday and I was telling Helena the story. I kind of flopped onto him. I almost fell off as I got on, and he just stood there like the most wonderful, patient, solid citizen in the world. And I almost cried. This horse just putting up with my horrible balance and everything that it took for me to get on. It really made me love him. And I think that team spirit of, we're in this together with our horse is something that you learn from lacrosse and that you bring to many, many things in your life. I think that's part of the joy that you find in horseback riding.
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand your teammate. If you're trying to achieve something together, you both have the challenge in front of you. And just like any team sport, you have to understand you've got a common goal, and what are the human strengths and what are the horse's strengths and what are each other's weaknesses. And you have to understand those things about yourself and about the animal that you're riding in order to achieve this goal that you want.
This explains why you don't hit your horse. Imagine if you're playing doubles tennis and your partner screwed up and you got to hit him, you got to whack him with your racket, you know, right? Yeah. Isn't that so stupid?
Yeah.
And yet that was such a norm when I grew up around horses that you hit them, you make them do it. In working with you and the way you approach the team of you and your horse and seeing what happens out there, it has given me such a much more pleasant experience around horseback riding. So Camp Scuffy, Lake George, riding with your dad. We got onto lacrosse a little bit because you were saying that you had to make some choices about where you were going with your sport career, and golf wasn't going to be your thing.
Well, that friend of mine that I spent the summers at Lake George with, she ended up moving to Massachusetts. Her dad's job got relocated, and the house that they bought in Williamstown, Mass., which is a beautiful, beautiful area of New England, was right next door to a property that had horses. A horse farm.
How convenient.
They only had two, well, at least two that came up to the fence where she and I used to play. And I thought, if I have to go to college someplace, then I want to go somewhere in Massachusetts because apparently that's where horses are. I didn't know. And nobody in my family is horsey at all. I mean, my dad was when he was in the military, but that was it. It wasn't a thing in our family.
And you weren't in a situation where your folks were going to buy you a horse.
Oh, God, no. I mean, and I had
asked. A suburb. It wasn't.
No, both my parents are from the city, and my dad was like, yeah, I rode in Arizona in the Army. We live in the suburbs of, we're 25 miles outside of Manhattan.
Right.
And we don't have the money, and that's just not what we do. And Suffern wasn't, and still isn't, a horsey area.
So you didn't grow up longing, I wish I had my own horse. It wasn't.
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did?
I wanted it. I asked many times. I would say, can I just get a pony? If we can't afford riding lessons, well, I can get a pony. And
I'll keep it in my
parents
room.
are like, we live in an apartment. Where are you going to keep a pony? And I was like, behind the pool? I don't know, So through my high school career, I was really focused on lacrosse. And then I decided, well, if I'm going to play lacrosse, then I want to do so somewhere that there are horses nearby. And so when I went to UMass to look at it, they had their Stockbridge. They had this whole ag degree program and all that. And they had horses, they had Morgans, they had pigs, they had sheep there. I was like, all right, this is where I want to go to school. So I went there.
Did you ride when you were in college?
I did not. I couldn't do anything except play lacrosse. It was practice from 6 to 9 a.m. in the morning. Then you go to classes. And then it was from 3 to 6. And then I had a job on top of that, my classes. So then after UMass, so I got hurt pretty badly my third season in, and I could not play anymore. And I lost my stipend, and I was a crap student, too. I think I had a 1.9 grade point average. I mean, with that kind of schedule. Plus, I had ADHD undiagnosed. I didn't know my ass from a hole in the ground at that point. So I transferred to a school closer to home, went back to New York, and switched degree programs. I pursued an environmental science degree at Ramapo College. And I was like, I need to do something. So I was working in an animal hospital, taking classes, but I wasn't doing anything physical. So I decided to take riding lessons at a nearby stable.
Ah.
And every spare minute and every spare dollar I had was learning how to walk, trot, and canter at this little place in Chestnut Ridge, New Jersey, which is right over the border. And I took lessons once a week and thought, okay, well, this is fun. And shortly thereafter, I moved to Boston because I applied for a job after I graduated college. I applied for a job at the Animal Rescue League in Boston.
Okay.
It was for a humane educator position. So basically taking rabbits and raccoons and stuff into the school systems and talking to kids about, how to be empathetic and learning about wildlife and stuff like that. So I moved to Boston and I didn't get the job. So then there was a number of years, like 5 or 6 years, I didn't even see a horse. And I bought a house in Hamilton, Massachusetts, which was the former headquarters of the U.S. equestrian team.
And so for people who don't know Massachusetts at all, where is that in the state?
That is north of Boston, about 26 miles north of Boston.
So there's some money there. Boston people live in the suburbs. There's a train line. And so there's a long history and a culture of horseback riding there that doesn't exist like where we live in Rhode Island. There's not a culture of...
There were horse farms everywhere in Hamilton. Hamilton, Ipswich, Essex, the whole North Shore area was pretty densely populated. But of course, and there were some eventing venues. Ledyard Farm was classic. Everybody who's evented has heard of Ledyard Farm. Groton House Farm horse trials. So it was very, very horsey.
And so where did you ride?
Well, I tried to ride at Myopia Hunt Club with a fellow named Patrick Keogh, but he didn't have time for me. So I was like, all right, I got to do this now. It was all I could think about. And I was working in IT in Boston.
No kids yet. You're married.
Kids,
you have no kids.
Married, my own house. I lived right across the river from the hunt club, so I could hear the hounds in the morning. And I was making stupid money in IT. So I was like, I want to take riding lessons, I really want to get into this. So I ended up finding a hunter-jumper barn, like a show barn, and it was Back Bay Farm, Robin Peterson, who was phenomenal. And one day in the wintertime, we had a lesson. It was a group lesson. There were a bunch of us in the ring, and somebody's horse got stupid and spooked everybody else. And I had just upgraded to this really nice show hunter mare who was a little hot. I was probably a little overfaced. She was great for me if everything was steady, but if something went wrong, I hit the ground. And I broke some serious bones in my wrist and required surgery. And while I was going through that process, recovering from the surgery and everything, I decided to really research the best. I was like, why did I come off? I shouldn't have come off. I thought I was doing great, And so, of course, you realize that I had absolutely no seat. It was then that I discovered centered riding and dressage. And
so pure athleticism wasn't getting you there.
No.
So you're an athletic person. You've got an athletic build. You're strong and you have great balance. But if you don't know the principles of centered riding, you got nothing once you're in the saddle.
Nothing. Right? So I'm like, all right, I didn't want to give up. I kept riding. I broke my wrist and I was like, I'm just going to get back on and keep riding. And after 6 weeks, I'm like, I can't lift a pot of coffee. I should probably go get this checked out. So then I started riding with an instructor, Stevie Kem, at Flying Color Farms in Rowley, Mass. And she took my reins away, took my stirrups away, put me in a dressage saddle on the end of a lunge line, and she had me do lunge lessons for 3 months straight.
Wow.
That's where I learned what it really meant to have an independent seat, a strong independent seat. And then she gradually increased my responsibility in the saddle from there. She was a phenomenal instructor.
We all need those in our lives, right?
And then I'll let you ask the next question. But from there, so I started working for her. I was her working student. And then...
Where was her barn?
In Rowley, Massachusetts.
Okay.
So just 2 towns north of Hamilton. And that was when I leased my first horse. His name was Jackson, and he was a thoroughbred Appy cross. And he was big. He was 16'3", maybe 17 hands.
For a 5'2" girl, that's a big horse.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I just absolutely loved him. He was not the most confident horse, but this is how you learn. And I remember hacking him away from the property. So they had this little trail that went down to the marsh from her farm. And I remember we were done riding. I hacked out of the ring and I said, I want to go down to by myself. You could see the whole trail from the barn because the barn was up on a hill. But Jackson wasn't too keen on going anywhere by himself. And I thought, well, I'm tired of riding in circles, so let's just do it. And we were 2/3 of the way through the loop, and something spooked him big, something in the woods. And I sat the spook. It was like a spook and spin. Mm-hmm. And I sat it. And I remember thinking when he calmed down, I was like, I just sat that. I just sat, and I didn't just sit it. I didn't just stay in the saddle. Like, I rode that.
That's real riding.
Oh, my God. I was like, that's it. I'm in. Give me everything. I want to ride it. Let it spook. It just launched me forward into, I want to ride everything I can, everywhere I can.
And you did. You rode at Myopia then, and you were part of the Jen Hebert team. Tell us about that a little bit, and then we're going to get to the point of our whole story today.
Okay. So I got pregnant. I was riding with Stevie for a while, and I got pregnant with Grace, and I rode up until 5.5, almost 6 months. Then I stopped riding, had Grace, and I was like, I can't wait to get back in the saddle. So at the time, I was on maternity leave, and I was like, I really don't think I want to go back to work. I want to be a stay-at-home mom. Maybe I'll do some freelance stuff on the side, but I need to get out of the house.
Okay.
And somebody said I couldn't go back to work for Stevie because it was just too far from where I lived. And someone said, well, Myopia is looking for some help. They hunt 3 times a week. I think they need somebody to go feed in the morning.
Heaven.
So I was like, well, I get up early, so I'll go and drop feed before their meets or whatever. And that's how I got introduced to Myopia. They went through a couple of stable managers before Jennifer arrived. And when I met Jennifer and her husband, Glenn, it was love at first sight.
Team Hebert.
We hit it off. Not only were we doing the barn in the morning, but then while the horses were eating or whatever, we'd sit in the feed room and we would talk. And Jennifer, I always say she's a walking encyclopedia of horses. She went through Pony Club as a kid. She was an eventer. She worked for Olympians. She knew everything there was to know about horses. She's an HA Pony Club graduate. So I would pick her brain.
You are truly a sponge for horse knowledge, and that has not stopped to this day. I mean, I'm sitting in front of a bookcase with 50 books. As much as you love riding, you love learning about horses and riding, and horse care especially. It's absolutely amazing to me how much energy you put into it. Sometimes I'll ask Helena a question and she'll say, well, if you listen to episode 62 of the Stall and Stable Show, you'd know.
I'm such an ass sometimes. I really am.
So you've got this wonderful partnership with Jen. Do you have a desire to own your own horse yet at this point? You've never owned a horse still.
No, not at this point. I did not own my own horse. And I didn't need to, especially at Myopia, because we had ponies and we had school horses and they needed to be ridden and they needed to be taught manners and all sorts of things. So there wasn't really a need for me to have my own horse. When Jennifer and Myopia parted ways, most of the staff did too. People have heard of Camelot and the Kennedys. Well, the Hebert days at Myopia were like my Camelot. So I parted ways with the club as well. But I still wanted to hunt. I just didn't want to work there anymore. And that was when I went and bought my first horse, which was Zeke. And he was a little quarter horse that we got from a ranch down in Pennsylvania.
We skipped over the hunt piece a little bit. When you were at Myopia, you weren't just feeding and caring for horses. You were really involved in the hunt. Tell us about that a little bit so we have a little background there. Because I think that's really what's in your blood beyond anything else with horseback riding.
I was working at the barn. I think Liz, I can't remember her last name, and Darren, they were the staff there, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And the first time I actually cantered outside of a ring was with Liz and Darren. And, you could ride all around the golf course at Myopia. They had these trails that went all around the golf course. It was phenomenal. And so the first time we actually galloped down one of those paths, I was like, I need to do this every day. This is the best feeling in the whole world. So I guess at some point they were like, all right, she can stay on. She can gallop out in the countryside.
That's so fun.
Whatever. So what happened was Myopia did these junior hunts, and I think they were on Sundays, and they were quiet and younger kids, and their parents could come out, and the kids would go out on ponies, and it was mostly walking, and you do a little trotting. So they're like, do you want to come out on one of these junior hunts? And I was like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, yeah, you'll be fine. Here you go. Take one of the ponies. And really what they needed was someone to babysit the kids.
Perfect.
And I thought, they're giving me this opportunity to hunt. I'm special. And it was like, no, they're short-staffed, and they just needed somebody to pony some of the kids.
A fair trade, though.
Totally fair trade. And it actually turned out great for me because I really liked looking after the kids, and it was a way for me to ease into hunting without being overfaced or getting in over my head.
So you haven't been the show ring, show jumper, dressage person. You truly came up through the hunt world. So a lot of what you're experiencing now is kind of like going back to basics and brand new at some level because you haven't been a show jumper type of a person.
No, I never learned how to jump a course. But the whole time, right across the street, we had this huge schooling field. Huge. And there were shows there all the time. It started out as the Fleet Jumper Classic, and then it became the Fidelity Jumper Classic, and then it became the Boston Jumper Classic. And we hosted Olympians, and Margie Engel, how many times did I see her ride? I was at the press conferences with her, Nona Garson, Kent Farrington, all these big show jumper people. And so there were all these schooling shows over there, and I'm like, I want to do that. I wanted to do all of the things, And I never really had a chance to, also because I was a mom. I still had to work. So it wasn't until I found Zeke and I boarded him at a little barn in Ipswich, and it was self-care, rough boarding. And I found that I really liked being able to control my horse's environment because it made my rides better. When my horse was happier and more content, then we had so much more fun together. And I could hack Zeke anywhere by himself. Mm-hmm. And when I got him, it wasn't like that.
So you really taught him to be self-sufficient and your partner, and you could go out and you trusted each other. That's an amazing moment. I
think it was because all of his other needs were met.
Okay.
That the only real challenge was creating some confidence in me so that when we were out by ourselves, he trusted me to keep him safe.
So that led you to wanting to have a horse on your own property at some point, and you moved to Rhode Island looking for a place to have a horse on your own property. Am I spot on there?
Yeah. I moved around to a couple of barns while I was up on the North Shore, always doing rough board, and met another woman who was really good at horse care. The two of us were boarding at a place together that was supposed to be super fancy, and the care was awful. We're like, let's go keep our horses together. And she had 3 and I had 1, and we found this great little barn around the corner. And we were so happy because she was awesome at horse keeping and I was awesome at horse keeping. And it was like being married, finding your perfect match. But we needed to move to Rhode Island, and I said I really need to keep my horses at home.
And so you found a spot with a couple of acres and you built a barn.
I built a barn. Now, back when I first started working for Myopia, their barn was under renovation. And it was like the first time the barn had been renovated in like 100 years or something. So I was there for a lot of the construction, a lot of the decision-making when it came to what materials, when the doors went in, when the floors went in.
Oh, so you got this experience and all that process. I never connected that. So there's like this moment where you say, oh, you can actually choose what kind of doors you want, what kind of hooks you want, where you're going to put this, where you're going to put that. So you love all that planning.
I was the first one in the barn for many mornings, feeding at 5 o'clock in the morning, and there's no electricity in the barn because they're working on the wiring. So I have to feed 20 horses in the dark at 5 a.m. because 15 of those horses are going to be hunting in 2 hours, so they have to have their breakfast before they would go out and work hard. So you really get to know your way around a barn when you're working in it that much in the dark. Or you come in and you find one of the horses has their eyeballs hanging out of their head because they banged their face on a metal rack that shouldn't have been in the barn. Or the mare whose foot is stuck in between the bars because the horizontal boards and the stall partitions were too low. And it's easy, so I experienced a lot of the things that happen to horses in a barn that's not designed by horse people.
Mm-hmm. So when you built your own barn, which was a humble 2-stall barn with an aisleway, nothing, we're not talking about a major barn here, but very well designed, and you had the opportunity to do your own thing, and that was obviously a really well-designed barn at the end of the day.
Yes. I took everything that I had learned. Now, I had also been podcasting in the equine industry. I was working for Bit of Britain at the time, and Tack of the Day, and Glenn, Jennifer's husband, and I, obviously we became lifelong friends. So Glenn and I were working on something called the Talking Equine Show, which was the very first podcast we had developed for Bit of Britain, and gave me access to the top professionals in the field: riders, horse keepers, trainers, veterinarians. So through those discussions, I started to learn a lot more about horsekeeping and horses in general. And then when we started the Horse Radio Network, my access to these professionals just exploded. I thought talking to David O'Connor was an honor. Well, when we started Stable Scoop and the World Equestrian Game Show, it was like having an audio library. I was mainlining the top brains in the industry.
Wow.
So I learned so much about it, and then was able to take all of that information and package it up into this little barn that I was building at my place. There were some other, when I was at Stevie's place, her barn was kind of not quite finished with construction. And so anytime anybody was working on something at their farms, I was involved in it. Because I was like, what are you doing? Can I help? And of course, barns are always shorthanded. So they're like, yeah, here's a broom, here's a hammer, get to work, So yeah, but by the time I got to our place in Rhode Island, the first place, I knew a lot about what I wanted.
So you are there, you've got Brody, Zeke passes on, and you meet me, and we go to look for a place to live that we can buy together and call our own. And we convert an old garage into a barn. We clear an acre of woods and try to turn it into a pasture. And we put in a riding arena. All of this driven by your desire for the right horse experience. And I think that when we all look back on our history, we all have a history with horses. Anyone listening to this show, and myself included as the host today, has a history with horses. And a lot of that is intentional. I mean, for me, I'm kind of an accidental horse person. I tend to like to be around horses, and I like people that like horses. I don't drive the bus on I've got to have a horse. But my kids certainly do, and you certainly do. So there's this constant change that happens in the horse world. And part of it, as you get more into it, is intention-driven. By the time you're really ready to have a horse and you need a horse property, you can't stay in Hamilton. It's too expensive. You move to Rhode Island, and you've got a couple of acres that you can work with. And then circumstances change again, and then you move to a new house, and you've got a chance to set up a barn, but it's still not quite what you need. And it's cold, and it's wet, and it's icy, and it's snowy in the winter. It's time to say, what do I really, really want?
Yes.
And what has been the driving force of the last couple of years that you've really been looking at and examining and considering around your next phase of horse ownership?
Space. And the next chapter in the story of Camelot. Space and people.
And you have neither of those here in Rhode Island. And I'm always saying, aren't I enough?
You're plenty.
And the answer is almost, but there's no icing on my cake, right? And so I'm happy to be your cake. I don't need to be your icing too. And so you started thinking about your next chapter, and so let's do the reveal. Tell us how that started and where you're at now.
The house that we had previously in Rhode Island, we had a neighbor that had a 3-acre field behind the house that allowed us to use that for horses. So I had 4 acres to keep horses on. And yeah, circumstances changed. So we had to move, which where we live in Little Compton is very difficult to find land a house with land that you can afford to keep 2 horses on. And we found something, but like Buck said, it was wooded and it had a garage, but it was 2.25 acres. And we're like, I don't know, I guess I can make that work.
A beautiful house.
Had a beautiful house, and there was a field next to it. There was some open space. I'm like, oh, maybe the neighbors will be nice again and let me use some of it for turnout or whatever. And it has this beautiful house, and it's what I call farm cat friendly, meaning it's set well away from the road, where if you've got barn cats or farm cats, we're not at risk of them dying by automobile. So Buck and I got started on clearing it, pulling up roots, planting pasture, converting the garage to a barn, putting up fencing. I mean, all the things that you need to do. And I thought, I'm going to make this work. I got to make this work, at least until Grace graduates high school. And we did make it work, and it was fine for 2 horses. And then you all know the story of Susie and Clarabelle, and now we have 3 horses on a property that can barely contain 2. And there are a lot of hoops to jump through just to feed and keep these horses from killing each other.
So you're thinking, Buck can't move because he has his job here.
Yep. I have been looking at Ocala and Aiken for a long time. My best friends, Jennifer and Glenn, they live in Ocala. Some of my favorite horse people in the world live in Ocala. There's the World Equestrian Center. There's lots going on there. But is it someplace that I could spend half the year? And I thought, it's a little busy for me. It's Ocala felt more suited to equestrian professionals, like upper-level competitors. And after the pandemic, I couldn't even afford something in Ocala. The World Equestrian Center went up and opened right around the time that COVID hit the world, and everybody started moving south because they could work remotely. So what I could afford in Ocala 3 years ago, I couldn't afford today. And I know a lot of folks went to Aiken and loved it. People said, oh, you would love Aiken. I'd been there a couple of times. This could be someplace that we could spend a couple of months out of every winter, and the horses would have the space and I wouldn't be freezing anymore.
So I'm kicking and screaming like, I don't know about this. And then I realized I've never even been to these places. So Helena had been looking at it, and we talked about Aiken, and you kind of settled on Aiken because it just felt like a place where you'd rather be.
It was just more of a community feeling, like it had a more residential feel than Ocala.
And there's a hunt in Aiken.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Yeah, there's a drag hunt, which checks all my boxes.
Hitchcock Woods, you've got all these things, and you know people.
It's also within driving distance to most of my family. I have family in Noonan, Georgia, which is just south of Atlanta. I have family in North Carolina, but it was still drivable to Ocala, so I could go to the other amazing horse place in this world for a weekend if I wanted to.
So centrally located for a lot of things that are important to you. So you start looking online at buying a place or whatever. And of course, we all live with our financial, can we really do this moment?
Yeah, Buck was like, he's like, your business has to pay for it. If we're going to take on a second mortgage, then you better make sure. He's like, you get this is important. This is a key thing.
This is
a key thing. He was like, if we're going to take on another mortgage, because you know what, people, a lot of folks think that Buck and I make a ton of money, and we don't. We just spend it wisely, and we have good taste. So it looks like we make a lot of money, but we don't. We're very average middle class people, maybe a little north of middle class. So he said to me, if we're going to do this, your business needs to be able to support the mortgage. So I was like, all right, my clients are horse people. I can do this. Heck, I developed tools for horse people to figure out what they can afford. So guess what I did? I went out and I used my own tools. I used my financial projections worksheet, my handy dandy horse keeping calculator, my business model planner, all of this stuff. I was like, I need to tighten up my business model and I need to tighten up my financial projections, and I have to figure out what I need to do in order to cover X amount of dollars that this mortgage is going to cost us. And it was a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing because I didn't know what properties we were looking at, how much we were looking at spending versus what I could afford. So we worked backwards and said, okay, what can I afford? And meanwhile, Buck's giving me the hairy eyeball, like, yeah. Is this going to work? So he said, our interim plan, and this was your plan, Buck, and I thought it was a fabulous plan. I was so depressed at the thought of having to spend yet another winter not being able to ride, freezing my buns off, trying to keep these horses from killing each other in such a small space.
They get so depressed in the winter.
So I'm like, you know what, Helena, you tried really hard, but this property is too tiny for everybody, and it's too cold and dark. So his plan was, okay, look, if we can't afford anything right now, Buck said, why don't you just go down for one winter? Just take one horse, either Susie or Clarabelle, take him down, do training board, get a little apartment, and get a feel for what we want. And maybe by next year, the market will start to recover and more stuff will come on the market. So
well,
I thought,
you could at least see if it was something that was going to work for you at some level. But once I suggested it and we started looking at potential apartments and stuff, I literally felt sick inside. My instincts are good. And my instinct originally, from a financial perspective, made sense. But when I thought about, I'm going to go down there and visit, are we going to be apart for the better part of 6 months, going back and forth? And I'm going to sleep in some little apartment, in a crappy bed above somebody's barn while I'm down there. I mean, I'm not at a point in my life where that really works for me. So,
and I was ready to sleep in the dressing room of my trailer at this point. Anything to get me out of the cold and dark and among horse people.
So the power of intention, the power of a common goal, Helena and I are when we put our minds to something together. And I think as a couple, you have to fight things out a little bit because things may not make sense to both of you right out of the gate, which is good. There's like a balance of power there. We started to look at what is going to be possible, what's not going to be possible. And then finally, we just didn't know. So I said, I need to at least go to Aiken. I need to go there and see what it's like. Like, how is it going to actually be any different from what we've already got here? Because I really didn't know. We drove into Aiken and I was like, okay. Oh, I see what you're talking about. I mean, there is a horse on every acre of property down there. It is Disneyland personified for horse owners. And I was like, oh my God, no wonder. If you want to be a movie star, go to Hollywood. If you want to deal in diamonds and furs, go to New York. If you want to really embrace the horse world, go to Aiken. So we went just to look around. It's kind of like shopping for kittens, though. We're just going to look.
Yeah, we were just going to look. So while we were down there,
story.
So while we were down there, a good friend of mine decided to drive us around and show us the sights from an insider's perspective. And we thought, okay, well, since we're down there, we might as well hook up with a real estate agent. And just really what I was looking for was the inside scoop on the different areas to live in. Like, do we want to live in a subdivision? And is Bridle Creek right for us? Is Three Runs right for us? What's up and coming? How close do we need to live to downtown? So that's really what I was looking for in terms of connecting with a realtor. So we met Barb Uskup, who works with
Carolina Coastal.
And she took us around and was like, let me show you what's out there.
Now, we had already done the whole tour
the day before.
So we'd seen a whole lot. And so we wake up in the morning and we're going to go meet with this realtor. And Helena has a builder coming with us. And I'm just like kind of losing my mind. Like, I don't know where she's going with this. Like, I'm so not ready for a realtor and a builder at this point. And I'm literally like, I'm like on the verge of like, why are we doing this?
And the reason that I had the builder was because nothing on the market was within our price range. So I thought, if I can build something really small, then I can control the cost. And what I was trying to do was figure out how much it would cost us to buy, I was looking at 5 or 6 acres and 1,000 square foot cottage or 1,200 square feet at the most, or a barn dominium. So I was doing my due diligence. Before I even took Buck down there, I was doing my homework.
Oh, there was a lot of background work that went into this, like a year of background work.
Yeah, a good solid year of a lot of research. So I had reached out to a couple of builders just to get an idea, ballpark of how much is it going to cost today to build something, a barn, a house. And then I could say, can we afford this? Or if I'm looking for a 1,200 square foot house and I can't afford that, if we drop that down to 1,000 square feet or 900 square feet, what can we afford? So that's really all that I was doing. And this builder that I got connected with was amazing.
Herb.
A true Southern gentleman. And he's like, I'm more than happy to, meet you and walk around and let you know if this is good or not good. So I can see how Buck would be a little freaked out by the whole thing.
Well, because to me, it's going to cost $700,000 to just, even begin to do this. And it's just not. And so we go, and the very first place that we go to, the very first place Barb took us to.
That was the first place?
It was the very first place. It was the first place we went.
Which is interesting because I had seen this place on Zillow the year before. And I had sent it to Buck, like, look at this. It's kind of weird. It's really small. It's tiny. It's kind of cute inside, but it's a little further outside of Aiken than I wanted. And she took us there, and Herb came with us. It's
11 acres.
And so Buck and Herb and Barb are standing up at the house, and they're looking at some other things. So I go out into the field, and I'm walking the fence line, and I'm looking at the grass, and I'm looking at this. And there were 2 horses out there. The previous owner had her horses there, and they were just as happy as can be. They came over and sniffed me and greeted me and then went back to their business. It was kind of cool.
5 acres they're fenced on.
5.5 acres was cross-fenced. The entire property, the perimeter, was already fenced in. 5.5 acres was cross-fenced, and it had a little sort of open-air barn, and then it had this old barn that looked like it was a utility shed now, and this tiny, tiny house on it. And it was surrounded by other farms. There's a big farm behind it. There's 2 farms next to it. It's just...
With riding arenas. Riders.
And it's up on a little knoll. So it actually sits up on a hill. And the pasture it was like gently sloping down and away from the property. And there was this beautiful breeze coming out of the west. And Buck was like, I love this place.
I was like, I think we can do this.
Yeah. And Herb was like, this is a really nice piece of property. Like, this is really nice. And the price was good. And Buck is like, I'm in. This is, like you said, it's like shopping for kittens. He says he's in. And I'm like, I see nothing about this property that tells me it's not a great first step into Aiken.
Right.
If it turns out to be a place that we really like, now remember, this whole mission was reconnaissance. We were just going to go down to see where within Aiken County we might want to buy or build. So I thought, well, this is affordable. It's a great place for us to spend a winter and get a lay of the land. And then Barb took us around to a bunch of other places. We did go to Bridle Creek. We did go to 3 Runs. We went to Todd's Hill. We went to Hopeland Farms, Cedar Meadows. We went everywhere.
And I didn't want to be in a subdivision like that. So to me, this felt like it's a farm or surrounded by farms. And for whatever reason, that resonates in my soul. And so to be there and feel like this is something we could do, certainly there's going to be some challenges, but it's not out of our reach. We came home and we decided,
let's make an offer.
And we did.
And I'll tell you what it is, or what it was about the property that really made this a no-brainer. Well, first I'll tell you the downsides. The downsides is that it's not in a subdivision and there's no HOA. So whatever your neighbors are going to do is what your neighbors are going to do.
The upside is it's not in a subdivision and there's no HOA.
There's no HOA fee.
So we don't have to deal with any boards or any BS that comes with it.
Right. The house is very tiny. It is 600 square feet. The upside, everything is new because the previous owner remodeled the whole place starting in 2018 right up to 2021, I think.
It's really cute.
It's really, really cute. Some of you have seen pictures online. It's completely fenced in, perimeter fencing and cross fencing. And there's solar chargers, and so everything's operating. So it's turnkey. You just move in.
And it has a studio.
Wait, hold on. I'll get to the studio. It's 11.3 acres. To me, that's like I just inherited a national park. Okay? Yeah. And so, 5.5 of it is cross-fenced for pasture, and the rest we will figure out what to do with it. So there was that. There's all this space. There are some live oaks there, so there's
beautiful.
There's natural shade, but then there's this open air barn that has divisions for 3 stalls, so you can feed your horses separately. They can get in out of the snow, if it snows in Aiken, because it has, and the rain and so forth, and of course the sun. And then there's a storage shed.
And the shed has a lot, when you say a shed, I mean, it's about 30 or 40 feet long. And it's got like stalls.
It was a barn at some point, whether it was a cow barn or a horse barn. It just has a flat roof, which you guys know that I am not a fan of flat roofs.
And it's open on one side. But it's going to be a great utility shed for us for all kinds of different purposes, storage and whatnot.
So the storage was there. So the shelter for the horses, the storage for all the stuff that comes along with it. 2 horse farms 3 horse farms. Literally our property borders 3 different farms.
And there's big venues right near us too, right?
So we're a very short trip. We're 2 minutes from Sporting Days and Vista View.
And the property has what was a construction trailer.
Right, that the previous owner built like a portico or an arbor, I don't know what you would call it, around it, and then this huge porch. And we started calling it the party porch. So the trailer is insulated. There's electricity that runs to it. It is the perfect recording studio.
Yeah.
It's perfect. And so it's separate from the cottage. The other thing that's perfect about this place is it's right in the middle of a lot of my clients. There's a lot of equestrian small business owners there who need help. I can go to their farms or they can come to my office.
So we went down, I think, the first week of February, and we closed on our property.
On March 30th.
On March 30th. And it's done. And we're going back in May. We spent a week down. We closed. And then we spent the whole week there.
Cleaning and buying furniture. We needed something to sleep on. We ate plastic forks and spoons. And we're going to have to go down a couple of times just to convert the place into Buck and Helena's little paradise and get it ready for when we ship the horses down in the late fall. We do plan on spending the entire winter there. I have no idea what we're going to do with our house up here. We have no idea how to be second homeowners. But I know this is the thing that you guys probably have been waiting this entire episode to hear. And that is what we will call this new farm. So as you know, our farm in Rhode Island is called Who Hollow because it is in a geographic hollow. And we are honored to have great horned owls as company pretty much every day the entire year. So we hear a lot of whoos. So Who Hollow up north, and our property in Windsor is going to be called Who To.
And so we do refer to it as Who To and Who Hollow now. So that's pretty fun.
Yeah.
And, the power of intention, the power of the equine spirit, I think is important. It's really supported us finding this place, and some of the additional money that was needed has kind of come our way, and in both Helena's work and mine. And it's a really exciting time for us to expand our reach.
And what I have come to realize is that the thing that horses need, truly, is space. They need the space. And when they have the space, then a lot of the social behaviors that we try to micromanage on smaller properties, they tend to go away. And I will be chronicling everything that we do at Who To, giving you my opinion, giving you facts, and sharing all the projects that we do along the way. The idea is this was a stepping stone. Let's move into this property, get the horses down there, and see what's what. We may decide at some point that we need to be a little bit closer to town, or we're just fine where we are. It is truly a stunning property. It's quite possible that we may decide to build a house there. Will we retire there? I don't know. Will we keep our house up north for the foreseeable future? Because Who Hollow is also a stunning place to call home. So there are a lot of question marks, a lot of unknowns at this point. We're taking one step at a time, and I hope that you guys will join us on this journey.
Well, Helena will be mapping out each step of her, where am I going to feed, where do I need to add fencing, where am I going to tack up. The property is ready for horses, but it is not that friendly yet as far as the workflow. So Helena's going to get to put all of her talent to work doing that, and she's already doing all that research. So lots of fun and exciting things happening at Stall and Stable, Who Hollow, and Who To. Helena, thank you so much for being a guest on your own show today.
Oh, he's getting all choked up. My husband loves me. And I think in the next episode, I'll go back to my role as host, and I want to ask you what it's like to experience that property for the first time and truly get an understanding of what it means, not just to me, but to horse people, because you're becoming every day more and more and more of a horse person than I think you ever have been before.
Well, we went to Smart Pack in the Boston area recently, and I said, if we're really going to do this, I need a helmet. And I bought a helmet. And that really turned the corner for me. So more on that when we reconvene.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, Buck.
It's been a real pleasure. Listeners, I'm going to turn it over to Helena to close us out. Thank you so much for staying with us here, and it was really been a fun conversation.
I will post pictures at stallandstable.com in the show notes, and you'll see things on our Instagram, a few things on Facebook, as well as recommendations and links to the realtor that we used. Maybe I'll have her on in the near future.
And the builder.
And the builder. Well, I don't want him to be too busy in case we need him.
Oh, right.
Builders are busy these days. But anyway, links and resources and pictures and more information will all be available at stallandstable.com. Don't forget to visit our sponsors' websites, americanstalls.com and barnpros.com. And that is going to be a wrap for this very long episode. I hope you enjoyed it.